In a room tucked in the back corner of the Royal Canadian Legion Branch 60 in Burlington, you will find the museum, a room full of memorabilia, artifacts, and historical photographs from the Navy, Army, and Air Force. It is a room full of stories. Legion First Vice President and Poppy Chairman Burns MacLeod shares the story of this member of the Royal Canadian Air Force who fought in World War II, his father, Hinson MacLeod.
As a university student from the Maritime Provinces, enlisted in 1940 in the Royal Canadian Air Force, trained as a pilot, was sent overseas with many of his friends in late 1940, was assigned anti-submarine patrol, flying out of the coast of Cornwall in twin-engine Hudson bombers with a crew of 5, and on one of those patrols in the Bay of Biscay, and they found a submarine coming back from Atlantic patrols to the coast of France where the submarines would be restocked, replenished, the crews would be rested, and so on. And the thing was on the surface, and they did their darndest to try to bomb it into oblivion. And my dad always said later that they made a big mistake in not paying attention, enough attention to what was going on around them. And this aircraft, this German aircraft, obviously summoned by the submarine, because they were close enough to the coast of France to get help, came blasting out of the clouds and sprayed the aircraft with 7.62 ammunition and wounded all 5 members of the aircraft, members of the crew on the aircraft. Particularly since my dad was the only pilot on board, a wound in the right hand that he had was painful and bloody and caused no end of problems as they were now trying to fly back to the coast. The story goes that there were a bunch of airmen and officers waiting for them, probably waiting for several aircraft to come back. And as dusk came down and it got darker and darker, they had almost given up hope until they heard the engines in the distance. And they could hear this aircraft coming closer and closer and lower. And finally they said, well, he's too low, he's going to hit the drink and, crash land in the ocean and they'll all be killed. And lo and behold, up above the dike along the edge of the beach came roaring this twin-engine warplane and slammed down into the runway. They had no hydraulics, everything was shot up. They careened down the runway at a great rate and went through a hedge at the end, but the only thing that saved them was that the tide was out. If the tide had been in, they would have hit the water. So Dad always took great pride in saying God was with him on that one.
At the hospital, the damage to his hand was so severe he lost most of the bones and was left with his thumb and pinky finger. Through the war, he was best friends with Russell Langley, who he'd met in basic training in Toronto. The two were posted together in Cornwall.
Sometime just after my dad was wounded, this young fellow went out on a patrol and the whole crew vanished. They never found them again. So when he came back in 1941 to Canada, he went obviously to see the grieving widow, and they'd only been married for 2 weeks before this young fellow went overseas. And one thing led to another, and in 1943 they married, and she became my mother.
Hinson then had to be recertified, proving that he could fly with only 2 fingers.
After the war, he ended up, by the way, coming back to Canada and served until 1946 as a training officer at No. 6 Bombing and Gunnery School near Belleville at Mountain View, and took a release in 1946.
He decided to return to university in Nova Scotia to finish his divinity degree. MacLeod then became a Baptist minister like his father before him. In 1959, he went back into the Royal Canadian Air Force as a chaplain until he retired at the age of 55, when he moved to Oakville.
And became employed with the Ontario Government Department of Correctional Services, working with troubled kids.
Burns remembers his father preaching on Remembrance Day.
When he was a minister in the Maritimes, he would put his uniform on and give his sermon from the pulpit in his officer's uniform from the service. And that was kind of a normal thing in those days, but boy, he sure looked good in it, and it always did fit. He never grew out of it. And we all felt, I think, the more how can I put it, inclined to remember the fallen because of what he was doing in that particular congregation.
Reporting for Halton News, I'm Nikki Wesley.